The idea of a silent New York can only be conjured up alongside an unimaginable catastrophe. One that the city, despite its size, its resources, and its strong willed people, found itself powerless to defend against. COVID 19 was the perfect storm that brought New York to a screeching halt. The normally bustling streets left devoid of sound, devoid of people, and devoid of life. The eerie quiet that hung over New York, etched tauntingly into the memories of its citizens, was only interrupted by passing ambulance sirens. Each time one went by, it was clear why. On March 20th, 2020, then Governor Andrew Cuomo issued the New York Pause Order, which 2 days later would close all businesses deemed non-essential. It also forbade private gatherings, instituted social distancing guidelines, and asked citizens to limit their use of public transportation for only essential work. With these new measures in place, New York City became the most populated ghost town in history. On the day of issuing, there were 1,942 new cases. Daily average cases peaked less than a month later on April 15th at 5,426. They then steadily declined, with averages in the hundreds persisting until the end of the year, when holiday gatherings and virus mutations resulted in another wave of cases. By year's end, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers had been diagnosed with COVID, while over 24,000 of them died. Living in Astoria, Queens, as a 22-year-old college senior, the onset of COVID was swift. NYU's classes went remote on March 9th, 2020, and the prospect of further shutdowns convinced me, as someone living by himself, to get out while I could. I moved back home to spend quarantine with my family, and Queens would soon become a global epicenter. While living in my childhood bedroom in Scranton, Pennsylvania, I felt a keen desire to get back to New York, but what I saw on the television kept that urge at bay. The image of refrigerated trucks holding hundreds of bodies, deserted streets, and mass burials were enough to convince me that my love for the city did not surmount my instinct of self-preservation. I was accepted into Columbia University's Oral History Masters of Arts program in early 2021. I knew that I was returning to a changed city, and felt guilt for running away when things got bad, only to return when things looked brighter. I felt I owed some sort of debt for my opportunism, and so sought to learn more about what the city I love had gone through while I was away. At the beginning of my first semester, I became an intern with Missing Them, a project carried out by the nonprofit newsroom The City and the Columbia School of Journalism's Stabile Center. Missing Them seeks to provide free obituaries to New Yorkers who died to COVID. After submitting a request for an obituary, I interviewed dozens of families trying to find out what it was that made their loved one who they were. People talked about the relatives' jobs, children, hobbies, inventions, dreams, and the memories that they shared. They also expressed regrets and admissions of blunt honesty about the less happy times and the grief that hasn't subsided since their loss. I wrote over 30 obituaries based off of what could be shared over the span of half an hour. As a student of oral history, I saw within this approach traits that coincided with an oral historical methodology and ones that contrasted it. The deep listening that goes into oral historical interviewing requires time, verbal space, and an attention to emotion and body language that this work, by virtue of it being conducted remotely and within the confines of a 200 to 250 word limit, simply did not allow. This and my ongoing interest in understanding the state of the city amidst the pandemic led me to imagine the possibilities that an entirely oral historical approach to storytelling could do in recording the highly emotional and complex experiences of New Yorkers during the pandemic. This story is a symbol of what is possible when utilizing an oral historical approach in recording the life histories of those impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It allows a narrator to tell his own story, interconnecting the way of life he knew before the pandemic with the shifting realities and discoveries brought about by the tumultuous period. It also illustrates the relation one has to histories that otherwise appear alien. And finally, allows connections to be forged through the building of honesty, trust, and genuine human care. In the first days of my internship, I combed through the articles we had published by that point. One of them had an image of several people wearing white and black uniforms digging a mass grave. There were several wood coffins stacked atop and next to each other. This was Hart Island. Hart Island is the largest mass grave in the United States. It has been in use since the 19th century and is due to run out of space for burials by 2027. The article notes that 1 in 10 of New York's COVID victims were buried on Hart Island in 2020. This amounts to about 3,000 burials if the 780 bodies waiting to be buried in refrigerated trucks at the time of writing all arrived there. This represents a remarkable detraction from the island's standard burial rate. 2020 saw 2.5 times more burials than the year before, and 1,000 more than 1988, the worst year of the AIDS epidemic. As I read, I thought about what it would feel like to have a relative buried there. A scarier proposition, though, would be having someone buried there without being offered a notification. For many, they will never know that their parents, siblings, or extended family are buried alongside a million people who met similar, isolated fates. I found one submission, before I even conducted the interview, to be different from the rest. Angel Irizarry contacted us to write an obituary for his uncle, Cesar Irizarry. His submission lacked a lot of the info necessary to create a profile for his uncle, let alone write an entire obituary. He didn't know when he died, where, or what his life was like in the lead up to his death. Angel and I scheduled an interview, during which he told me he had not had contact with his uncle for decades, nor had any of his family. Angel called him a lone wolf and told me that as a result of them not knowing where he was when he was alive, they didn't know where he was in death either. I immediately had a gut feeling that Cesar was buried at Hart Island, so I told Angel I would look into it to see if I could be of any help. After accessing the island's database, I found Cesar buried in plot 412. I called Angel back immediately to let him know, and he was grateful to finally know where his uncle was, but I could hear in his voice that he didn't really know where he was. Hart Island is small. It's about a mile long and a third of a mile wide. Located in the west end of Long Island Sound, it is only accessible from a ferry terminal at City Island in the northeast Bronx. City Island's beaches and boating culture have allowed it to become New York's version of a seaside getaway. As people scan the picturesque waters, Hart Island interrupts their gaze. New York City bought the sliver of land from Edward Hunter in 1868 for $75,000. It had been bought from the Siwanoy tribe over 2 centuries prior, and its ownership was bounced around until New York declared the island to be under the jurisdiction of the Corrections Department. Prior to the purchase, it was used as a Civil War prison camp for Confederate soldiers and a burial ground for the Union. The first burial of a civilian took place in 1869, initiating a century-and-a-half-long era of burials for the city's poorest and most alienated. With the cemetery being run by the Corrections Department, prisoners from the city's jails, including Rikers Island, would serve as the gravediggers. Each pit typically holds 150 bodies, stacked atop and alongside one another in wooden coffins. Surprisingly, the island has served many purposes while operating as the city's burial ground. These include the reinstitution of a prison camp for Germans captured offshore during the Second World War, a quarantine center, a missile facility, and a drug rehabilitation center. A businessman from Barbados even sought to turn part of the island into an amusement park for the city's African-American community. In the years preceding the AIDS epidemic, use of the island's buildings had ceased, and its primary use was solely as a public cemetery. Hart Island has seen the burial of thousands of AIDS patients. Amongst a sea of white poles jutting out of the ground, the island's lone individual gravesite is designated SCB1 1985. This stands for Special Child, Baby 1, and the year of the child's death. This is where the city's first pediatric AIDS victim is buried. Despite the more than 1 million bodies buried there, Hart Island is relatively unknown to the New York community. Many people are unaware that the island exists, let alone that there is such a place where the city buries people. Those who do know about it often do not have positive things to say about it. Expressions of fear are often followed by comments like, "That's where you go if you're poor and unloved," or something about how it's just the homeless that are buried there. In reality, each person buried there is a person, and deserves the same respect as someone buried in a private plot. In that same reality, the city has allowed Hart Island to fall into disrepair and has instituted harsh visitation policies that have prevented friends from visiting and denied families the opportunity to visit their loved one's grave, relegating them to a small gazebo. These issues have led to local organizations taking the city to task over the horrible conditions they find in and around their loved ones' plots. Efforts made by the Hart Island Project, The Picture the Homeless Oral History Project, and other groups and unaffiliated families bring to light the humanity that each person buried there possessed, and the utter lack of it shown in the burial process and surroundings on Hart Island. Beyond the decrepit buildings touching the shorelines, skeletons have become exposed due to the erosion caused by Hurricane Sandy in late 2012, and its blame falls at the feet of the many city governments that completely overlooked the possibility of this happening and the impact that it might have had on the families of those buried on Hart Island. Some changes have been made since the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation has taken jurisdiction from the Corrections Department in 2019. This move was made to ensure better access for visiting families, which has been achieved through a more streamlined visitation process, although one that feels a bit more surveyed than one would expect at a cemetery. Visitors can now go to the island after scheduling online on one of the select dates that there is ferry service. After signing a waiver at the dock, they board the ferry, then a bus, and then they are led to their specific gravesite by a park security officer. It is also important to note the controversy that has arisen since the decision was made. A $33 million contract to a landscaping company with no cemetery experience, while continuing to employ the services of a Rikers captain who oversaw burials pre-transfer in the same position. President and founder of the Hart Island Project, Melinda Hunt, has stated what seems obvious, but for some reason has not been acted on. She says that in order to restore public confidence, New York City should hire an experienced cemeterian to oversee management of Hart Island. Until then, there is still much work to be done. New York State formally declared Hart Island eligible for listing on the State and National Registry of Historic Places due to the same buildings that many feel disrespect the memory and burial place of their loved ones. With burials soon ceasing, calls for a memorial for all of those buried there, but especially the victims of the Spanish flu, AIDS, and COVID, have come about. The de Blasio administration claimed it would consider legislation for a memorial, but that it had no proper plans in place for its construction. All of the things that Hart Island can be are unknown. It can be a place of refuge, a place of memorial, a place of grief. Instead, it's a world of its own, balancing its visitors on a precariously thin emotional line, managing the active, deep human feelings inherent in visiting a loved one, and the anger, regret, and desperation found in a place so obviously forgotten. A dispute that occurred decades ago led to the alienation of Cesar from his family. This confused young Angel. His wondering where Uncle Cesar was could have been chalked up to youthful curiosity, but instead he carried this with him throughout his entire life. This is the story of Angel's search for Uncle Cesar. I traveled to Fredericksburg, Virginia to meet Angel and his family and talked with him to get an understanding of how far back and how deep the absence of Uncle Cesar went. What I heard in those conversations was a story of personal transformation, one that led to a desire to right the wrongs of his and his family's past, and one that ended on an island just off the Bronx. So, why Fredericksburg?
So my move to Fredericksburg was basically orders that I got in the Marine Corps to come to Virginia from Okinawa. So when I came, a friend of mine, I was his corporal, he introduced me to his cousin, and we got married, had children, and I decided that this was a good place to raise my kid. A suburban place, a place with single family home and trees and sidewalks. You could hear the birds chirping, the crickets at nighttime, away from the city noise, away from the ghetto, away from the things that were easily utilized to take me into the streets or take someone else into the streets. And I wanted to raise my kids in a place that I felt was safe for them. And this was the area that I decided to stay in and raise my children. I lived the urban streets and I raised my kids in the suburban streets, in the suburban way.
Can you tell me more about where you came from?
So I was born in York City, Pennsylvania. Small town, but it's a town that is full of depression. A lot of people doing drugs and gangs and stuff like that. All of my family is either in Pennsylvania or New York in the Bronx. I would kind of just go between both places. I would go to the Bronx and live that life with my family, my grandparents. God bless, rest their souls.
What does that life look like?
Well, it's a life of a divorced kid.
Yeah.
My father and mother divorced when I was 3 years old. And due to that divorce, and from living in separate households, my father, he decided to kind of like go the right way, and my mother not so much. She decided to go the wrong way and live a unruly life, which led me to living an unruly life as a teenager. At one time, she was there, and then she was very absent. Drugs, alcohol, hanging out, partying. Myself would have been left at people's houses. And then growing up in the inner city, you become part of that inner city because that's all you know. You know, living Section 8, welfare, the street life is something that you have to become part of, because if you don't, you just get eaten alive. And so I became part of that street life. I hung out at all times, doing the things that the kids of the streets do, messing around with alcohol as underage, you know, hanging with kids who do unruly things until my father was able to get custody of me. My father was a very hard man. When you live a rebellious life, you go against responsible people. And my father was that responsible person who, of course, I would buck up against because of who he was. He grew up in the hard lives of New York City. And just as, you know, I spoke of a person growing up in inner city, he grew up in the inner city and dealt with the things that the city bring forth. You can only imagine growing up in the Bronx in the 60s and 70s, what that lifestyle would be like. So you ever saw the movie Warriors? Then that's the type of lifestyle you could see how things would have been in that time frame. So my father, he learned from any mistake that he has created, and he became the man that my grandfather wanted him to become, a respectable, hardworking man. Family comes first. He's the type of man that I sought to be and the type of man that I am now. I am a Christian. You know, I was raised in a Baptist household, but my Christianity came alive in 1997 when I got into a bad car accident and technically was killed, to reflect that if I don't do something with my life, these are the streets that I'm gonna die in, whether it's from a stray bullet or whether it's from a vehicle or what have you. In that hospital bed, I called out to the Lord, asked the Lord to forgive me. I told the Lord I knew I wasn't right with him, and for him just to be there for me, I knew he was real. After I got out the hospital, I went to my father. I said all things were going to go wrong in my life. What I was going to do, I was going to go into the military. So I picked the hardest one, the Marine Corps, because I was a hard head. Of course, in boot camp, you get kind of like that jail religion. You know, you get away from the drill instructor, you go to church. When I was in Okinawa, Japan, I was drinking pretty heavily and fighting a lot. And a staff sergeant friend of mine, wasn't a friend at the time, he basically told me that he was going to throw me in the brig if I didn't go to church with him on the next Sunday. And so I went to church with him, and I actually felt the power of the Holy Ghost. From that point, I started thinking differently. I started seeing things differently. I was a very agitated individual, someone who would pretty much punch someone's lights out if they look at me wrong. But when I became a Christian, just knowing that I could walk by faith and not by sight, I got out the Marine Corps after the 9/11 bombings because my wife was pregnant and I wanted to raise my child. I didn't want to be away from my child. And so I stepped out on faith and got out the Marine Corps, which I was told was impossible, but I was able to get out. And, you know, I seen through prayer people be healed. I seen people be delivered. I seen people be set free. And I'm a professor of that because I seen it. I experienced it myself. I know that through Christ, all things are possible. And I believe that, and I hold on to that. And that's why I am the person I am now.
If you didn't find Jesus, where do you think you would be right now?
I'd be dead or in jail. I don't see anything other than that. We would get together once a year, twice a year. We would call kind of like family reunions. Got some good Puerto Rican food, rice and beans, pastel, bacalito. Some people drink a cerveza. We play some salsa, some merengue. My grandfather played the guitar. My father would be on the maracas. Another brother or myself would be on the congos. We would just jam, we would just party. The good thing about it is everyone was talented, so it didn't sound like a bunch of craziness. It actually sounded pretty good. It was a great time, just a time of fellowship, a time of loving each other. That was the time that it would feel like our family was more personable than distant. Even if we had different views, you could see the camaraderie in us when we all got together. My family's a loving family, very private though. A lot of them don't want to speak about their lives. So what I could say is that my grandparents were the glue that kept us all together, and they're gone. And so right now we're just trying to find a way that we can kind of like keep that camaraderie. My grandfather migrated to the United States from Puerto Rico as a young man. My grandfather came over first to establish a life, and then once he was established, he went and got his wife. You know, a hardworking man, worked in restaurants. He actually told me that he learned English in a restaurant. All the time I would look at my grandfather, I would see the spitting image of my father. You know, I looked up to my father, so when I see my grandfather, I looked doubly up. And his voice would be like a voice that could calm a storm. He would just say, "Hey, Janito, ¿cómo estás? How's everything? How's the family? Dios te bendiga." That's how his voice was, you know, just very sweet and very soft. And always was someone who would want the best for you. He loved to cook. He loved to joke. My grandmother and him would love playing dominoes. And our conversations, I would make sure when I seen him that I was in the room where he was at. And I was talking to him. And if he needed anything, I was the one getting it. If he needed some water, I'd get him some water. I just wanted to be around him 24/7 when I was with him. He just was a sweet spirit, very calming spirit. He would do anything. He would give anyone the shirt off his back if he had to. That was my grandfather. Cesar was born to another woman that my grandfather was with. So Cesar stayed in Puerto Rico until he was about 17 years old. His biological mother died. And when she died, Uncle Cesar had to live with another uncle on his mother's side. And apparently there was some unruliness that he had. That uncle decided he couldn't take care of Uncle Cesar, and so contacted my grandfather and basically said, "You need to come get your son." And then my grandfather came, and Uncle Cesar lived with my grandfather, my grandmother, and his siblings in New York. When he got here, my grandfather had him work with him, worked as a busboy and also washing dishes. This was in the early 70s before I was born. You know, I was born in 77, so I wasn't there. But from some pictures that I saw, I mean, he's posing with my grandfather and my grandmother, and they look like everything is cool. With my grandfather, it's easy to get along with him as long as you're doing the right things. If you start doing the wrong things, he's not the type of man that's going to be stagnant and not say that you're not doing the wrong things. He's going to tell you that. And then if you have a rebellious attitude, you're going to buck back at him. If someone bucks back at him, then of course there's going to be some kind of hostility. He was a free will person. Came from Puerto Rico, from a farmland, avocado farmland. So just imagine going from that to going to New York and seeing that big city and so much temptation and whatever else is there. Somewhere down the line, there was an altercation involving some kind of alcohol abuse. And something happened between him and my grandfather, which made Uncle Cesar get banished from the family. I don't know the exact details. I can't tell you what it was, but alcoholism can tear a family apart. And I believe that's exactly what happened. I believe that alcoholism played a factor in ripping Uncle Cesar from the rest of the family.
When the dispute happened, what was the family's response?
I mean, I think there was denial of him. I mean, even in the obituary, he's not listed in the obituary of my grandfather. So there's a denial of him. But one thing that I do know, again, third-party information, of course, but when my grandmother died, before she died, they asked her how many kids she had, and she listed Cesar as one of her kids. And the same thing with my grandfather. They asked him how many kids he had, and he listed Cesar as one of his kids. So I truly believe that whatever the altercation was in the past, that my grandmother and my grandfather both forgave Uncle Cesar. Now, whether the siblings forgave him or not, That's up to them. That's between them and God. I met Uncle Cesar like once, and I really don't remember how it went. I just remember that he looked a little bit like my father. He looks a lot like my grandfather. And I remember asking my father who he was, and my father told me that it was my uncle. And so I always knew that Uncle Cesar existed. I just never really had the relationship that I wanted to have with him.
As a kid, did you notice Uncle Caesar's absence?
Of course, my father would always talk about Uncle Cesar, but then I was always like, well, where is he? And then my father would say, no one knows. And yeah, I always knew he existed. I always knew he was out there. I always knew he was my uncle. Just never knew where he was at. I just took what my family told me as gold. Oh, he's the uncle that was banished. He's the uncle that no one knows where is he at. But I always knew Uncle Cesar was there. Always. I asked about trying to find him several times, and I just was told that he lives in the streets. No one knows where he's at. And think of New York. New York's a big place, 5 boroughs. The streets is a big place. It's a dangerous place. If someone wants to stay hidden, they could stay hidden. So I didn't really push forward past that.
What would it have looked like to find him?
I mean, I'm kind of like an emotional cat. I try to give him a hug, try to talk to him about, his past, talk to him about what he's doing in the future, find out what's going on with him, just try to gain rapport, communicate with him, and see if he would love me the way that I would want to be loved by him. And I would try to influence the family to let him back in. I believe that would have been my motivation to get him back. Let him know that he's loved. Let him know that I forgive him, if I can even forgive him. What's like the deepest thing that can happen that you could be banished from your family? I'm not holding grudges against him just because other people might hold grudges against him.
Was it hard not knowing where he was?
Of course, especially during this time of COVID, people were speaking amongst their own groups. People weren't even leaving the house. So if he doesn't have family, he doesn't have friends, or if he's on the street, what does he have? In that time frame, everyone needed to be comforted. And if you didn't have that type of comfort, you could be living in depression, suicidal ideations. Something crazy could be happening with him. So, of course, it just opens up the door for the what ifs. I was a very good detective, very good, and I found people all the time. And I knew that there were databases out there that civilians can use to find people. This day and age, they have Facebook, they have Twitter, they have Instagram, and they have all those other type of social media platforms. There's what we call digital fingerprints. And so, of course, if someone's missing, I'm going to find that person. I mean, I tried to find my grandfather on my mother's side. I didn't find him because he's dead, but I found my uncle trying to find him. And I brought my uncle together with my mother. And so, of course, if there's a family member out there and I have the ability to track them down and find them, I would. And you can't find them, then all you have is the what if. I'm the type of cat that don't want to live in the what ifs. I don't like to live in the place of gray. I want to live in the black or the white. If it's black, it's black. If it's white, it's white. I want to know the facts. I want to know the truth.
What kind of perspective does a success like that add to the struggle to find Uncle Cesar?
It makes you feel that it can happen. It makes you feel that if you have some sort of diligence, you can find somebody. And I was able to find Uncle Cesar, but the sad part about it is found him too late. My grandmother died from underlying health issues December 27, 2019. She just missed COVID. COVID did not affect us personally until 2021. 2021 was hell for my family. I caught COVID March 6th. That same day, my aunts called and told me that my grandfather was dying because he has COVID. That same day, my father-in-law contacted me and told me he has COVID. A day later, my grandfather died. A month later, my father-in-law died. I couldn't go to my grandfather's funeral. I had to watch his funeral through Zoom because I had COVID. There's times that I sit back and I think of my grandfather, I think of my grandmother, and I think of my father-in-law, and it brings tears to my eyes. When you look at the percentage on what people say is COVID only affects that 1%, 1% don't mean anything to you when you're not affected by it. But when you're affected by it, 1% is everything. And unfortunately, I had 3 members die of COVID. I found out that he died after I found him. When his father died, I wanted him to know that his father passed. I found this address on a civilian database that I used when I was in law enforcement. I saw that Uncle Cesar was connected to that address, and so I sent my aunt, and she went and spoke to William, who was living there, and that's when she was told by William that Uncle Cesar died from COVID.
When you found out, what were you feeling?
It's like crushed dreams of ever meeting him experience my kids and experience, my successes in life, from me ever learning any knowledge or wisdom from him. It was just crushed dreams. From the time that I met him, I was probably like 10 years old or something like that. I'm going on 45 now. I just have figments, pieces of a puzzle that will never be completed. There's so many pieces, there's so many what ifs, there's so many unknown factors. The only time it will be completed is when I get to heaven, and if Uncle Cesar's there, I could speak with him and ask him. Holding a grudge didn't work out for anybody. My uncle still died, and he died alone. What did it prove? It didn't prove anything. Maybe if Uncle Cesar had the type of family that people would want, maybe things would have been different. But again, that's a what if. You can't live on what ifs. Well, I'm not saying Uncle Cesar is out of the ballpark with anything, because he could have located his family and made amends himself too. I'm a different person than them. I know that I would want my family to be together. I know that I would want my family to be unified. Cesar took care of William. William was disabled. He's in a wheelchair. Cesar was there to help him get around, do what he has to do. And whatever type of care that Cesar did for him gave William an admiration for him. Uncle Cesar's birthday was April 9th, and William texted the family and told the family to remember Uncle Cesar and to celebrate his birthday. I don't know William personally. What I do know of him is that he loved Uncle Cesar. I know William loved him like a father, which showed that Uncle Cesar had some kind of impact on William's life. So it does show that whatever occurred in Uncle Cesar's life, maybe he decided to change. Maybe he decided to get his act together. The stuff could have happened when he was like in his early 20s. How many kids in your freaking early 20s, does everything right? I look at kids that are in their freaking 20s and I'm like, that could be my kid. You know what I'm saying? So I could relate to kids in their freaking 20s or teenagers. A lot of kids are freaking knuckleheads, I was a knucklehead. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to just down you and cut you out. I saw that Missing Them writes an article about New Yorkers that died from COVID, and I felt that was kind of a way of honoring Uncle Cesar's memory. I had to fill out a form, and then I received an email from you, and we spoke on Zoom, and then we spoke about Uncle Cesar's life, as much information I could give you about Uncle Cesar. Knowing where his body was, you had a suspicion that he could have possibly been buried at Hart Island. And you said you was going to look into it, which you did, and you confirmed that he was buried at Hart Island. From what I know, if Hart Island could cry out, I feel like it would cry out, because it's a lot of lost souls there. People kind of who've been forgotten by the family, by the friends.
How does it feel knowing that he's buried on Hart Island?
It's horrible, man. It's horrible because he does have family. It's hard for me because when I think of Hart Island, I think of lost souls.
You call them lost souls. What do you mean by that?
In my law enforcement career, I dealt with overdoses, and I dealt with homicides, and I dealt with different types of deaths. And people who died of an overdose looked like they were just in so much pain and so much agony and so much struggle. I've seen people who kill themselves. It looked like they was in so much pain, so much struggle. And I seen people who died in their sleep with a big old smile on their face. And so I feel that people who die alone, that's considered a lost soul. I feel like their spirits call out for someone to love them. And if Hart Island can speak, Hart Island would scream, because there's people who died there that were homeless, people who died there that were forgotten, people who died there that was prostitutes, people who died there that were John Does, lost souls. Someone who is alone, isolated, feels like there is no hope. I feel like that's what Hart Island's all about.
What do you think about finding out about Uncle Caesar's burial on Hart Island from someone like me, as opposed to maybe someone from the city who should have done it originally?
And I just think that it was a blessing that you was able to locate him. I didn't care who would have told me where he was at. As long as I found out where he was at, I'm good with it. But you and I established a rapport. I mean, it was great that you found out, but it also showed to me that you was a man of your word. You said you was going to do it, and you did it. And you just didn't do it on your time, but I felt like you immediately did it. I think you told me the next day that he was in Hart Island, which to me spoke a lot about your character and your diligence.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Personally, I was happy to have been able to bring some sort of
Closure.
Yeah.
It's good stuff, man. That's why you're here. You know, you showed that you was a man of passion, and I told you that I believed in you. I don't trust everybody. I don't trust every Joe Schmo. You got to prove yourself, and I mean, you proved yourself. That's why you're here. You know what I'm saying? I'm treating you like family. You're sitting here, you're relaxing. You're talking to me. You met my family. You came to my household. You know what I mean? If I didn't trust you or believe in you, you want to be here.
As we prepare to go to the island, what are you thinking?
I don't know, man. It's something that is kind of surreal. It's a sad fact that I want to be able to say to Uncle Cesar, I love you, man, and I'm here for you. If you need anything, this is my kids. This is, my family. I don't have that, man. All I got is memories, which I really don't have. So I have to develop an emotional status within myself on what I'm going to deal with when I go there. Am I going to stand before it? Am I going to cry? Am I going to be silent? I don't know, because it's something that's going to have to happen. When it happens, we'll see. But to be able to go on Hart Island, we just spoke about it, and now it's going to be a reality that we're actually going to walk on it. And I want to give him kind of like a funeral, give him the last rites, open up the Bible and give him the scriptures, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, let his body be laid to rest. So maybe you'll feel some peace, or maybe just peace within myself. My goal and my wish is to remove him from Hart Island and give him a proper burial. But I'm not the next of kin. So ultimately, it's up to his siblings to make that choice. I'm here with my father, Angel Sr., as well as my man Tyler Brady in front of his apartment. It's about 9:30 in the morning on a Sunday, and we're about to go to St. Raymond's Cemetery to go see my grandparents, as well as go to Hart Island and go check out the gravesite of my Uncle Cesar. It's a beautiful day, the sun's out, the birds are chirping, feeling good, and just excited to see the sights that we're going to see. My grandfather, he loved his wife so much. When he lost his wife, he just wanted to be with his wife. And he was hurting, and the Lord, took him. He's with his wife now, and he's in heaven, and it's a beautiful thing. And he'll always be in our hearts and in our minds, and always. So Mira. Excuse me.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Now, do you know what section?
Yeah. Show the statues.
Do you know what statue?
Your girl, I think it's over that way. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, get in the car.
Okay, gracias. Thank you, man.
Okay, I'm gonna take it. We're gonna find it now.
We're almost there now. I know.
We'll find it.
Please, I got money for gas and anything.
It's okay, pa. Don't worry about it, man. I'm not loaded, but
You're doing good.
I'll do good, man.
That's a blessing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
One Bronx man, like, or helping the other Bronx man. What part of South Bronx you was born at? The South Bronx?
Yeah, I was raised over by. You ever been to Willis Avenue?
Yeah, Willis.
But years ago,
Yeah.
that's when this shit was burning.
Yeah.
Okay, now you see this section here? All it is? These are the Holy Cross. Okay. Now,
This looks like the area.
just remember, you gotta get close to the highway over here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So when you come in, when you're close to the highway, just take the Holy Cross is right there before the Holy Cross.
Yeah.
And my parents are right over there.
Oh, praise God.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye,
you so
guys.
much, man.
God
Your
bless you.
parents, your parents raised a good son.
If they say that, right now, but I got my doubts.
This is them. This is the first time visiting my grandfather's gravesite. It's a beautiful tombstone. My father right now is ripping weeds out of the grass to, show respect. You can see the admiration a son has for his parents because he's basically mowed the lawn with his hands. Right where they're buried at, you have the big holy cross showing that Jesus is watching over them, and it's beautiful. See how the angel came out of nowhere? How do we know that he was not an angel? What was in me for me to stop him? And then for me to get my father to come up and speak to him, gave us a ride, got out of the car, walked up to the sites. Angels come in disguise, man. I offered him money, he wouldn't take it. He didn't want nothing from us. All he said was, God bless you, I'm glad I helped you. He got in his car and he took off. We'll never see him again. So Lord, I just thank you for blessing us this day. Thank you for letting us make this trip. For the gentleman that picked us up and helped us find the location of Abuela and Abuelo's gravesite, the honor that my grandfather and grandmother gave me while on this earth, the relationship I had with them, I would never give away for anything. Amen. Oh, Abuelo. You got your wish with your wife now. Man. Love you, man. Love you, Abuela, forever. We are here at the beginning of the ferry to go to Hart Island. At this time, we're going to go see the gravesite of Uncle Cesar. It's beautiful outside. The feelings is expectation. Once we get on the ferry, we'll see how emotions go. But I'm not the type of guy that shows emotion. So right now we're on the ferry. We're going over to Hart Island. They said it's about a 12-minute ride. Once we get there, they're gonna put us on a bus. We have to wear our mask when we're on the bus. The ferry doesn't look like a boat that you would think a ferry would look like. Looks like it could be a ferry that could hold like a vehicle or something like that. We're gonna be directed to our designated site and go from there. The way I could describe it, looks like some old barracks, kind of like a little fortress. Some old buildings broken down, windows are all out. The police even said some of the buildings could be demolished at any time. They could fall down at any time. So you got to follow where they're going and make sure that you don't deviate from the location where you're supposed to go. They really want you to keep to that site. They don't want you to walk around and interfere with someone else's celebration or anything like that. So if you can describe Hart Island, from what I see right now, it looks very scary and very sad. It just looks like a very scary, very sad place. It looks like a place where I did like military training at before. If it's a cemetery, then it's a sad cemetery. Like it doesn't look like a cemetery. It's very desolate area, very desolate place. So I'm interested to see what the grave sites look like. Do they actually have anything but someone's name and like what the gravesite actually states? But yeah, it looks like a very sad place at this point. If you look across from the water, it's so beautiful over there at City Island. And you look across over here, it looks like it's like a horror movie. Yeah, we're pulling up to the dock. We're about to dock, so you might want to step aside. We're on the bus right now. It was a very bumpy ride. Looks like you're just going through kind of like woodland, and you see tombstones here and there. The one that I was able to read said 1983 on it, and it was just literally right beside the road. Like it wasn't like placed in a place where you think that a tombstone should be. It was just literally right on the side of the road. So there's weeds everywhere. It looks like it's like a swampland. Definitely looks like there's probably like some snakes and all kind of, insects and probably rats and everything all around this place. Some of the parts look like people live there. Like right now I'm looking and there is trailer parks and there is barbecues. Looks like they're cutting wood and everything like that as well. So yeah, it looks like someone's living there. So I mean, it's hard to explain. To me, it just looks like you see like the desolate buildings. The windows are all out in the buildings. You see construction work. It looks like the place is definitely very disturbed. Doesn't look like a place that you wouldn't even think there would be bodies here. But there is. There's bodies that are here. There's a lot of John Does and a lot of Jane Does here. And we're going to the location where my uncle is buried. And we'll go from there. How do they get assigned like where to go? Is it just wherever's open?
So they open section by section. So when they open the section, then they bring the bodies. They have the names, and then they plot. They put them in the ground, and then they mark it where they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe there's actually bodies here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Hello? Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm sorry, General. All right, thanks. Yeah, I see it.
So we're walking up to plot 412, right by the smokestacks. Okay, we gotta stand here.
Yeah, this is your spot.
Oh, this is it?
Yeah, this is it.
Right here?
Yeah, right where this thing
Oh.
was.
He's here?
Yes. Right here.
Doesn't even have a cemetery spot.
If you need anything, I'll be over here.
All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Yep, this is where Uncle Cesar's at. Man. Like I said, I'm not a very emotional guy, but this kind of like takes the cake, man. Like you cannot tell, like we just rode on the bus right over it. They put a block of wood where his tombstone would be if he had a tombstone. His body's right under here by the condemned buildings. This is horrible. He isn't someone who's forgotten. He has family,
I always loved him. I never forgot him. Never did. He had a sense of humor. He's a joker at times. Loved watching television. Loved movies. Loved to eat too. Oh yeah, loved to eat. Yeah, a lot of good times. Just the alcohol took a hold of him. That kept him distance from the rest of the family.
alcohol can destroy families.
Oh yeah, he loved his whole family. It's just when he started drinking, he got out of control. Usually people that are abusive drinkers, they don't realize they have a problem. So they don't accept any help.
Uncle Cesar, we're here. We just left Abuelo's grave, and it's definitely hard to believe that you're right here. I know I didn't know you in life. I'm sorry for that. I know there were circumstances that led to that, but I never forgot about you. I always thought about you, I always asked about you. I don't know exactly why you had to come to this area here, but we're here for you, and everything that we have done as a family against you, we ask for forgiveness, and everything that you have done against us, we forgive you. I know William said that you was like a father to him. I would have liked to have seen that, and I would like to know maybe if you had any kids. I have children. I have a biological daughter, a stepson, and a granddaughter, and everybody's doing good. My daughter's name is Jalacia, Keyshawn, and Leilani's the granddaughter. But everybody's doing good. I started off a little rough as a knucklehead, but I finally got my act together. I wish I could have known you more. Wish I could have spent time with you. I know that alcoholism and whatever else plays a part in some of our stories. And I even was down that road too with alcoholism as a young man. But I'm doing better now. And your brother's here. Your brother's here, Angel Sr., and he just built you a nice shrine with a cross that he literally handmade. And we love you, man. Maybe somewhere down the line, the family will decide to move you from this place. Until we meet again, Uncle Cesar, God bless you, Dios bendiga, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. God bless you, Uncle Cesar. So I wrote in the dirt, forgiven and loved Cesar Irizarry. So now, if a vehicle or somebody comes by, they're gonna know that Uncle Cesar is right here.
And we'll let the family know.
Yeah, we found you.
Yeah.
We found you. And you do have family, you have loved ones.
People that we'll continue talking about them.
Yep. Is that the bus? Yeah? Yeah. All right. Love you, Uncle Cesar. God bless you. And now that we know where you're at, we'll come here again and visit you, and hopefully we'll speak with the family, and maybe they'll come and get you out of here. There are people here, lost souls, and they're looking for some love. And may the souls of all these people here, may they find favor and family and friends to come and visit them. Life is too short to be holding grudges. Let them go. Forgive each other, because you never know when the Lord's going to call you home. It's been a journey, man.
Yep.
It's been a journey. And it's sad that something had to spark in me because of this COVID thing. And I wish that, I would have got that spark way before this happened.
No, everything worked out perfect. It was meant to be for all of us to unite and meet here,
Now we know where he's at. Now we have a location. In life I couldn't find him, but in death I know where he's at. No longer lost.